Okay, so with our test mark sheet, we've got to the stage where we had our new percentages mark sheet, and that's we're going to make as a copy of the row mark sheet and then allow it to calculate percentages. So click on cell A1, I'm going to say that's going to be equal to single speech marks, row space marks, single speech marks, then an exclamation mark which says we're going to look up the other spreadsheet, capital A1, and that you can now see class, because that's what's written in the first spreadsheet, there, row marks. I'm going to copy that formula across, so highlight the cell, get the small cross at the bottom right, drag that across, release, and now we've done the same thing for all the top there, and we can copy that top row all the way down through the range, right down to row 30, and that now looks very similar to the first one, but the thing is that each of these cells is looking up the other mark sheet, so we've got row marks at the top there instead of 2Q. So if we go back to the row mark sheet and say if Alexander Fleming was to move class from 2Q to 2P, that will then be reflected in the new percentages mark sheet. And so any changes we make on the row marks get copied across to the second spreadsheet. So let's just see if we can now get some averages, some percentages here. So if we delete on the percentages sheet, Sue Black's mark, it's been copied across from row marks, we're going to say that's now going to be equal to, we need to type in a formula. So single speech mark, space marks, single speech mark, exclamation mark, divided by, again, all space marks, forgot the single speech marks there, speech marks, and then exclamation mark. Now, I forgot to put in the E4 here. Oops. So that's the row mark that we're looking for that first test for Sue Black, and then it's divided by the row marks. Now this time it's the total, so column E, this time $3 means that we're always looking at that total cell, no matter how far we copy down. And because it's a percentage, we're going to multiply by 100 there. That should give us 70. So that's 70% there. And we can do that for all of Sue's tests by dragging that formula across all three cells. So those are all percentages now. And then we can drag that down the whole table, right down to column to row E30. And that's now calculated percentages for all of them just in there. One thing you'll have to be careful of is the averages now aren't averages of those percentages, so it would be worth deleting these and putting in new averages, because then it'll give the average of the percentage. But we'll come back to one of the problems with averages of this, because anything that's showing up as a 0, you can see that where we copied that formula across, because there's nothing in the cell in row marks, it's giving us a number 0. So now we've got our averages, and we'll have to reformat those again to reduce the number of decimal places. Okay, so there's our averages over percentages. Now, although percentages are a useful way to do it, it's not very easy to see at a glance what's going on. So quite often people will want to have a general idea from the class who's doing well and who isn't, who could do with improving. So if we highlight the whole column and then go to format and conditional formatting, we're going to put in a color scale over here. So click on color scale, and people near the minimum value will put a color red. People at the midpoint will set a midpoint of being a number of 70%, will make them amber or yellow. And then anybody near the top maximum value will give them a nice bright green for good. And if we click on that, that now shows that scale all the way through there from those who aren't doing very well, like Professor Victoria Martin, who actually is probably doing very well, and through to the top here with James Clerk Maxwell, also from Edinburgh University, doing spectacularly well. So we've got those there. And if you copy that color all the way across the cells there, you'd have that for all of the tests or for all the people. generally it's more useful to do the same thing for each column. Then you'll get the color scale, the color conditional formatting for each test, rather than just for that one, rather than for the whole class for the whole time. So it is a little bit repetitive. You do need to go through that, but it is worth doing so you get a more accurate picture of what's going on with your students. And it just makes it easier to see exactly what's going on per test rather than across the board there. Okay, so you do that for all 3 assessments. The other thing that's quite nice to see is an indication of trends. So you can do that with a small, what's called Sparkline graph. So put in equals Sparkline, and the range is going to be dragging through all those 3 tests. And whoops, I'll try that again. Sparkline is the way to spell it. And there we go. So we've got that sort of trend graph, just very quick, and we can drag that down through all the other pupils there. And it allows you to see at a glance whose performance is improving, who's just taking a recent dip, and that just appears in that cell just there. Another thing that's quite useful to have is if you want to know what the marks distribution was on a particular test. So if I highlight through test 2, assessment 2, and go into insert chart, so I could go through insert and then chart, or you can just click on the chart icon over here. And initially the column chart isn't going to be of much use, but if you click on chart type and highlight all the way down to other category, and it's this one here, histogram chart. If you click on that, that gives you the marks distributions. Initially in quite chunky distribution, but if you then customize that chart, click on histogram and change the bucket size to something like 5%, it gives you much better distribution of what's going on across the boundaries there. Okay, so that's our distribution. And the last thing that you might want to do is to make sure that somebody doesn't accidentally type raw marks into the sheet, is to protect the sheet. So if you go to Tools, you can protect the sheet from being edited, and that's just for the percentages, not the raw marks sheet. And you can say set permissions, and in this case you can just show a warning to say don't edit this. And so if I try to now edit that and maybe say I've got new marks for Anne Glover, and instead of going at the raw marks, maybe I try and type it in here, I'll just get a warning saying don't do that, go back to the raw marks sheet. And the only other thing you might possibly want to do is to just put a bit more detail on what the assessments are. Again. And you can change various aspects of the alignment, whether it's center aligned, whether it's top to bottom aligned, whether the text wraps or just goes overflowing, and the rotational direction of the text. So it allows you to change how your text appears up here. Okay, that's everything on that. So have a go through it yourself and then just try playing around with it. And I've also talked about how you would then go on to share it with other members of staff and making copies for different classes as well on the handout that there is there.